Despite what some might say about me, I do not consider myself part of the Undertale Deltarune community, but I've been watching it, quietly, for a long time now. As an outsider, I was given a very different vantage point, one that was not shaped by the comfort zone the larger community has settled into. Undertale is an extremely parasocial game. There's no getting around that. As a high power level weeb who rarely even interacted with the English-speaking internet in 2015 when Undertale dropped, I wouldn't find out about the game until Japan did. First as a screenshot in a small segment of a game magazine, and second when it took over some of the Pixiv Top 100 for its anniversary. Let me reiterate, Undertale is a highly parasocial game. When I finally decided to play it, I cleared the ruin section, and then I shelved it. But weirdly enough, that was enough to become deeply invested. I consumed all the peripheral content I could get my hands on. I thought about the name daily. And most importantly, it cleared any and all doubts about game dev being the right life choice for me. I had become consumed in it. In Undertale fandom content? No. In the video game creator and music composer persona, Toby Fox.
Toby Fox!
I was consuming all the information I could get about Toby with a fervor comparable to the fans' combing of Undertale itself. Now, obviously this sounds kind of silly considering how much Undertale itself is a source of information about its creator. So naturally I did get around to actually finishing it, only after reading every interview and digging up every piece of footage and surviving posts related to Toby. So one last time. Undertale is a parasocial game. No one was more ready to see this quality of it than someone already deeply invested in the author like myself. Now, as much as parasocial elements are notoriously useful from a financial standpoint, it's not that simple. Toby made Undertale parasocial for a reason. He was trying to communicate something to the world. Something aside from the messages that have already been identified within the game. I took the full brunt of this message from Toby in a way no one else could. And with it, insight that extends even deeply into plot and theory implications. The reason is because I am an otaku. Toby Fox is not an otaku. His core fanbase does not consist of otaku. And yet, strange as it may sound, his message was intended for otaku more than anyone else. Today, I'm finally going to share that message with you. Video games exist in a very strange cultural space. At once they're this symbol of low investment media, strongly associated with normiedom and vapidness, while also happening to be the primary platform by which Japanese artistic expressions reach the West. Toby Fox found himself right in the crossroads of all these elements. It's no secret Toby values his childhood and culture. The constant references to American culture and sense of the author having grown up in the 90s alone is enough to make that clear. At the same time, Undertale makes constant references to Japanese games, particularly the ones he grew up playing. However, there's one Japanese game in particular that seems to have left its mark on Toby's mind in such a major way as to become one of the most vital cornerstones of Undertale's entire identity. No, I'm not talking about the Mother series. I'm talking about Brandish. Among the messages about friendship and peace and escapism and completionism, there's another side to Toby that only his most serious followers may have taken note of. It's something easily overlooked by non-otaku, which is most of Undertale's fandom. It's Toby's obsession with the concept of the yusha, i.e. the otaku concept of the most conventional hero. The type of hero that has good looks, wields a sword, and vanquishes a Maou, an evil king, to save his world. Based on what Toby has said, Brandish appears to be his initial childhood run-in with the Yusha concept, manifested in Brandish's hero, Varric, aka Ares in the original version. The Yusha itself is a concept full of conflict and contradictions, most of which otaku media has explored itself. Concepts such as contradictions between peace and violence, value on normalcy while possessing traits of an outcast, and fighting tyranny while identifying with power yourself. If this already sounds Undertalean, well, then you're thinking down the right track. For Toby, his fascination with the Yusha added the extra conflict between his native loyalty to the world he grew up in as an American and the wildly antisocial, eccentric value system provided by this otaku concept. The friction between these elements is fundamental to the creation of Undertale. Everyone knows that Undertale knows it's a game. We typically think of it such that Undertale is a normal fictional universe unto itself, and certain entities within it have the power to break the fourth wall of the game executable and boundaries of storytelling. Not uncommonly, we see complex theory crafting about the Undertale timeline and order of events and all that. Well, I'm sorry if you're attached to that kind of thing, because it's time to completely re-examine the logic of Undertale's world. There are two fourth walls in Undertale. Undertale is not simply aware that it is fiction. Undertale is fiction within fiction. Things are going to get a little complex from here, especially given the inherently controversial nature of analysis and theorizing. To solve this issue, I'm going to use an organization device that should clear out any of the usual issues that come with this kind of info. All information will be grouped into three categories: confirmed information, inferred information, and speculated information. We will be using these categories both when speaking about the games and Toby Fox himself. With this, we can effectively avoid any of the usual Gasterlicious pitfalls of UTDR analysis. So let's restate the idea, and this time, assign it its appropriate category. There is no exact hard evidence for the idea that Undertale's world is fiction within fiction. If there was, you wouldn't need me to point this out, as it would have been observed nearly a decade ago. Much more important than this concept is actually the ideas that support it. And these are where the confirmed information is going to get juicy. Let's start with something often overlooked when it comes to analyzing Undertale: New Home. The event here is, of course, hearing the Asriel backstory recounted by the various miscellaneous monsters. This scene invokes a sort of poetic, abstract, sentimental mood, and for most people, it just amounts to a literal backstory info dump about the characters of Chara, the original fallen human, and Asriel, Asgore's son. From this info is built the commonly speculated upon timeline of Undertale. But there's a whole other side of all this to unpack. To understand it, we have to look at all the elements, not just the raw backstory information. Let's start with a basic inferred observation. Undertale's lore logic is metaphorical. We have inconsistencies, such as the way 1 minute humans use their best magicians to seal the monsters, and the next minute humans supposedly can't even use magic. We have direct acknowledgement of game logic with no in-universe explanation, such as Asgore destroying the mercy option and shopkeepers being aware they are invincible within their shop. And finally, we have plenty of surrealism, like the New Home scene. Barring the possibility of some crazy, unreliable narration deal, Undertale blatantly does not operate on conventional logic and consistency to represent its world. There's a good reason for that. Undertale's world is a game. There's a lot more to derive from this, but for the time being, let's explore the most central pillar of Undertale's narrative, and with it, Toby's core perspective. What Toby lacks in conventional writing experience points, he supplements very strongly with two things: his sense of establishing moods and his sense of establishing motifs, both of which likely stem from his musical ability. He mentioned once in Undertale, it is meaningful that important things come in sets of 3, which, when taking his frequent allusions to Christianity into account, is almost certainly inspired by the concept of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And I'm not a theologist, so I'll simply explain this concept from a basic conceptual standpoint. The Father is the highest form of the entity, in this case the entity being Christian God. The Father lives in heaven and isn't easily interacted with, but rules over everything below. The Son is the physical manifestation of the Father on earth in a form humans can interact with. The Holy Spirit is the concept of the bond between humans and the entity of God. This might have activated some mental light bulbs. Asgore is the Father. He rules at the highest point of the map, representing the boundaries of the world. The Holy Spirit is Toriel. Toriel is what binds the human to the world of Undertale and prepares the first impression of Asgore, in this case via fear. The Son is, of course, Asriel. Asriel is who the human, Chara, was closest to. Their relationship is the most tangible, immediate embodiment of Chara's connection to the underground. Each one of these characters is a personification of the player's relationship with a video game based in a conventional hero's journey. Asgore is the Maou, the evil king. He is the final boss. Undertale even has a term for his type of monster, fittingly called boss monsters.
Oh, he's a beast.
He marks the end of the journey and the end of the game. He guards the borderline between underground and the surface, the video game and reality. Killing him is the objective of the game. Toriel is the tutorial, from which she derives her name. She marks the beginning of the game. She babies and mothers the player through explanations and handholding. While fundamentally a good person, her excessive protectiveness inherently supports a violent view of the outside world and Asgore through defensiveness. Asriel is the time spent in the game itself. He is the player's experience of the game. This easily provides explanation for why there is the distinct war mechanic in place where Asgore only ages while having living offspring. The life of Asriel, his offspring, represents the progression of the game. In other words, time moving forward in his world. So then, time isn't moving forward when playing Undertale? Where is Asriel for us to form a bond with? Well, this brings me to the next point. Undertale's backstory is Undertale. What do I mean by this? Undertale is a world that is unto itself a game. When we in real life start the game of Undertale, the game has already been played prior to us starting. This is where it's crucial to understand Chara. Chara is one of those elements of Undertale where it's so common for their concept to go misunderstood, often with just a select few informing the majority and then being seemingly forgotten. Chara is many things, but for the sake of this section of analysis, we're just going to focus on the aspect of Chara that the text, the demon that comes when people call its name, refers to. What does this mean? Well, it's a little easier to perceive than you might think. In many classic RPGs, you are allowed to name your character, even if they had a canon name and personality. Chara is just blatantly a reference to this. Toby once said that the intended name is your own name, then reframed it as a backup suggestion if you can't think of another name. The point is, you are supposed to type in a name. The game does not care what name you type in, barring some forbidden ones that overlap with existing characters. It also refers to Chara as the true name, blatantly short for the perfectly generic name character, cut short by the limit of text characters that can be typed in, and also happens to line up with the Japanese abbreviation for the word character, although that could be just a coincidence. In other words, Chara is the product of your input, the exact same way a nameable character in an RPG is. Chara is your own investment. Whether it's your name or just a name you came up with, Chara is the vessel you inherently impose your desire for control onto. Chara is you having power over the world and RPG-type growth. Keep this in mind because it's going to be important when we talk about Deltarune. So, when we name Chara, we generate history in that moment. We are all at once imposing our will to control and grow onto Undertale's world. But unlike other RPGs, Undertale doesn't allow us to simply carry out this will. The result is instead Chara's backstory. Here is where we can truly begin to understand Toby and Undertale. With all the things we just went over, we now have the tools to thoroughly investigate the meaning of everything in Chara's backstory. The first thing we notice is that Asgore is benevolent to Chara, Toriel still is married to Asgore, directly supporting him, and all the monsters support Chara. This depiction of Undertale is peaceful. Chara and Asriel are best friends and live as siblings. In other words, Chara had a proactive bond with the underground, but not yet one that would involve any conventional hero's journey of doing battle. We know Chara wants to go to the outside where they originate from. We know there are golden flowers there. Keep this in mind because it matters a lot. We know that Chara hates humanity and wants to use Asriel's power to attack humanity. We know that Chara becomes a corpse from this. Asriel becomes the soulless Flowey, and Asgore declares that all humans in the underground must die, effectively settling into his conventional Maou role as the final boss. Toriel also settles into her role as the tutorial. And finally, we know that children then fall down into the underground and are killed before we, the actual player, finally take control. We also know that each of these killed children represents a different basic human virtue and their respective inverse. Undertale as a game has already been played multiple times before we even begin Control. Naming Chara is all it takes to set all of this in motion. Chara is the initial contact, the embodiment of the innocent sociopathy that enters a game world, connects with it, but ultimately sees it as a tool for power and revenge. This lines up with the depictions of Chara's personality we get to see, childishly innocent yet lacking empathy. Which brings us now to the essence of Chara in this backstory: early childhood. Toby has explained how his initial experience with Brandish happened at an age so young he was interpreting strange and subjective things in the game. It was such a formative experience that you can see his attachment to it into his late teens and 20s, like the inclusion in his Halloween hack, which prototypes a lot of Deltarune concepts, and his college graduation mural. Toby clearly experienced something I myself know extremely well. It's that initial shock of seeing your ideal Yusha image. It's the image of a character that represents flawless, heroic power. My personal earliest memories of this kind of shock were with Link in Ocarina of Time and Cloud in Final Fantasy VII. While I may have moved on to concerning myself a bit more with the mental and physical makeup of cute girls and more relatable masculine role models, I never forgot what it feels like to feel a raw sense of admiration towards a Yusha. And Toby certainly did not forget. Toby expresses in the making of the Halloween hack just how much Varric represents his ideal of indulging in power. A power that puts you above others. In childhood, the desire to be a Yusha, a heroic protagonist, stems from an innocent, indulgent desire to be stronger than those around you. Something I'm sure we've all experienced. Chara contrives the means to make Asgore a murderer by indulging in their own desire for power. Their suicide led to the possession of Asriel, which led to Asriel's death at human hands, something that only happened due to Chara's own proactive attack on humans. This inspired Asgore's sense of justice against humanity and subsequent killing of the additional fallen children. The Yusha needs a Maou to be a Yusha. The Maou creates the justification for Yusha. It's actually not clear if the fallen children even possess unique bodies from Chara or not. I won't get deep into it as it's not fundamentally important, but there are some suggestions that all fallen humans share the same body, such as the fact that Asriel notes the bandages in Chara's coffin to be surprising, Chara originally dying from illness, not wounding, and that the humans we control starts the game with the bandages equipped, confirmed by the Japanese version to actually be bandages, not a band-aid, suggesting that Chara easily possesses this body in the G root because it's a recycling of their own original body. Furthermore, given things like soul mode changes, it appears as if the other souls almost exist latently within our red soul. Having all the souls share the same body adds an extra cynical edge. It's very much articulate of the anger a player experiences toward their own death upon being killed in a game. Whether they are fully their own persons or not, it's clear that the previous fallen humans amount to a battle between universal human virtues and the Maou. Just like any story about a Yusha who must save their land from an evil tyrant. Good versus evil. We are almost entirely presented these virtues in the context of violence, whether attack or defense. These were humans who played Undertale in the in-universe sense of the game. They were simultaneously protagonists before us and the victims that justify the continuous cycle of Yusha and Maou violence. So as strange as it may sound, Undertale is the backstory of Undertale. We start our actual control as the real-life physical player controlling the Red Soul because the Red Soul is determination, the virtue that comes at the end of all other virtues, the virtue of persistence. Persistence is granted by the fact that we are a real-life human being, granted the power to keep resetting. This simultaneously paints Asgore as the conventional evil that is trying to stamp virtues out of existence in a classically evil way, and shows that we, the player, are only inherently bound to determination. It is the player input that will decide what other virtues we display. This is why literal timelines, while certainly interesting, will never feel like they're being textually supported in particularly clean ways. The history Toby built for Undertale is much more symbolic and metaphorical. But is that alone really a satisfying answer? I don't know if this is just me and associating it's just a metaphor with shallow attempts at artsiness, even if it can work in some cases, but something about it just doesn't sit great with me with Undertale. Well, it's time for me to dig into some of the stranger, more cryptic elements of Undertale, Deltarune, and Toby Fox, and take a look at some potentially very heavy-duty plot implications that I'm confident most people will find both convincing and shocking. So, we've answered the meaning of how Undertale begins, and we've established Toby's strange, critical admiration for the Yusha concept. But what about the end? The endings are often where some of the most quoted moments come from, especially in regards to people getting a reading on Toby Fox's message about peace and friendship and whatnot. But a person's value system and perspective can't be summed up in just simple messages. And for someone who prioritizes symbolism and motifs as much as Toby, many of his deeper ideas and perspectives show up between the lines, as we just observed. We all know completion isn't bad, touch grass, don't fight if you don't have to, and all that. So that begs the question, what are the deeper ideas beyond these? Well, a lot of what we're going to dig into expands upon the surface messages, but draws out a more complex, challenging, or outright conflicted perspective. Hold on tight, because things are going to get a little crazy. But first, we need to talk about magic and witches. What is magic at its essence? Answer: something that is not real, but proposes itself to exist. What are the ways to cast a magic spell? Answer: lying to someone, manipulating someone's perception, or getting them to agree that the magic is real. What is a witch? Answer: someone very good at casting magic. What kinds of things can be done with magic? Answer: raise up giant towers from nothing, create entire worlds, and even raise the dead. The most cultured viewers right now know exactly what I'm referring to. Umineko no Nakukoro ni by Ryukishi. Nothing particularly important, just happens to be one of the absolute best pieces of literature ever written. If you haven't played it yet, I highly recommend you do so now, preferably in the original Japanese language. Go learn it if you don't know it. Something that makes Umineko so genius is the fact that it is a story about magic and witches, but all the magic is real in the sense that nothing is actually fantasy. It's all magic in the way I outlined above. So what does this have to do with Toby and Undertale? Well, for starters, we know Toby had contact with Umineko. In fact, we have video proof.
Old is desire.
So with that said, let's take a closer look at magic in Undertale. The first case is in the opening and reiterated in the waterfall glyphs as I mentioned earlier. But then in the library we see a clear statement that humans cannot use magic. What do we make of this? Honestly, magic is talked about so infrequently in Undertale that most people don't even give these bits any thought at all, even a lot of theorists. Determination is by far the bigger focus in nearly all cases. In addition to what I just mentioned, we get some flavor text about Toriel using it for reasons other than combat. So is that it? Humans can't use magic, but I guess actually kind of can? Monsters can use magic. The end. Well, if not for a certain tiny bit of unexplained Deltarune lore, I would have probably given it no further thought. I'm referring to the very mysterious shadow crystals, and it just so happens that one specific glyph in Waterfall that won't mean anything to most people could become the key of unraveling one mystery after another. Without candles or magic to guide them home, the monsters used crystals to navigate. In the same room as this glyph, we see crystals scattered across the black backdrop. They are purple, a color symbolically associated with darkness. There are also lanterns placed throughout the room. Upon turning up the light in a lantern, the path will grow brighter. But that's not the only change that occurs. The crystals become invisible. These are crystals that are more visible in darkness than in light. Sound familiar? We don't understand much about the shadow crystals in Deltarune, but we know for sure that they're referred to as glass in the light world. In other words, in the brighter context, they are more transparent and harder to see, just like these crystals in Undertale. Okay, cool. We know that these are likely shadow crystals in Undertale or an equivalent. But what is the consequence? Remember my explanation of how magic works. Magic is anything that is not real presenting itself as reality. The means of establishing are lying, tricking perception, and arbitrary agreement. What is the best canvas to use for this? The answer is shockingly simple. Darkness. We see this concept expressed and emphasized many times in Deltarune. So is this the Undertale is a dark world theory? No. The answer is a bit more involved than that. There's one small, crucial detail that everyone overlooked when thinking about the way in which darkness can be used as a canvas for creation. What is typically the first thing we create out of darkness? The thing that allows us to even interact with every other creation? The answer is light. Without light, we cannot even perceive what we create from the darkness. But with enough darkness, we can create whatever we choose, even light itself. Now, for those of you really steeped in the Deltarune rot culture, you probably already know what to do with this new toy I've just given you. But hopefully that's not most of you, so we have a lot to dig into. Let's put Deltarune aside and start with where this matters most for Undertale. Undertale takes place in an underground cave system. There are 4 areas in Undertale, each of which correspond to a visual motif found in real-life caves. For the ruins, it's stone. For Snowdin, it's snow. For Waterfall, it's water. For Hotland, it's lava. A little fact about underground caves that can be easily forgotten is that they tend to be very dark, sometimes pitch black to the human eye levels of dark. Fortunately, we don't even need to trust the science on this one, since if we look at that all-important glyph again, we can see that by default, the underground is dark. Interestingly too, we can see that the monsters are lacking access to things that light up the dark, things that they do have access to at the time of us playing the game. What changed? The development of the world. Creation through darkness. There are 2 very important consequences of this, and one mildly interesting speculation. The first thing to pay attention to is what monsters are made out of. Magic. They are stated to be opposed to humans who have literal physical form. Their death results in dust. Their souls are made of love, hope, and compassion. Anyone who has read Umineko is probably screaming for me to just say it at this point. Monsters are the product of human imagination. I don't just mean this in the sense that Toby and the artists designed them. I mean that all of those descriptions, when paired with the observations of the nature of the setting, paint a picture of a creature that is not literal, but rather imagined, like a child playing pretend. Let's look at the next vital consequence of creation through darkness. Flowers. Remember when I said to keep in mind the association of the golden flowers in the cynical outside world of human beings? Think about normal monsters who are born and die within the underground itself. The form that represents them in death, dust, is a particularly abundant material in caves. But what about the golden flowers? It's clearly stated both in Chara's backstory and in the True Lab entries that the golden flowers are from the outside world. We now have more than enough to understand Flowey's fundamental concept. Azrael's essence, his dust left after death, possesses a real, outside world flower. Azrael, up to that point, was the product of Chara's initially innocent bond with the underground. That innocence was discarded in favor of trying to amass power and attack humanity. It can be seen as a corruption of the bond with the underground as a whole. Flowey is the manifestation of that corrupted bond. Flowey is the game reduced to an objectified experience for the sake of extracting utility. The outside world flower reflects the notion that Azrael does not have the love, hope, and compassion that would normally create the monsters. He is instead a constant reminder of objectivity without ideals, only tenacity, i.e., determination. When you think of determination in its most essential concept as the power of persistence, being an object that does not rely on magic, darkness, perception, etc., would naturally possess more of it than the normal monsters whose existences are very volatile. There's a lot of official art that puts Flowey in a spotlight of sorts against the darkness. Even some key scenes in the game with him do this. The significance of that should be very clear now. There's often confusion when it comes to separating Flowey from Chara and how they both seem to be stand-ins for the player.
This is by far the most insight we ever get into his character at once, and basically serves as the punchline to that whole side of the game.
When you look at it from this angle, it should make a lot more sense how they play different roles. Chara is the childish first contact that turns into a warped ideal of the Yusha. Flowey is the soulless husk of a game experience after it's no longer able to be seen as anything other than objectified. They are linked in that one caused the other, but they're not the same. It makes sense people would have a hard time understanding this because of the way Chara is so steeped in ideas that link back to Japanese otaku media expressions, something that most Undertale fans are sorely lacking in understanding. It's particularly important to understand why Chara and Flowey are not the same idea, because they have completely different fates. And looking at the fates of these respective characters is crucial to understanding Toby's perspective. You can see the concept of Flowey pronounced in the way Omega Flowey becomes realistic. He explicitly tries to reflect twisted, cynical perspectives on the world. This clear symbolic association of the flowers with physical, tangible reality gives a bit of an extra layer to Azrael's line about how there are a lot of Floweys out there, referring to the outside world. It's a way of emphasizing everything in the underground is the product of idealism, aside from Flowey, who is the embodiment of the outside world itself. There's a really nice piece of symbolism too, where New Home is a grayed out repeat of Home, but only the golden flowers from the outside world have color. It's a perfect representation of how the end of the game is on its borderline with the outside world, just like the beginning. But at the end, we are approaching the outside world instead of departing from it. It is a lonely battle with the Maou, the evil king, before the game comes to an end and we return to our lives. The world where the golden flowers reside. By the way, New Home as a concept is likely inspired by the fact that in classic RPGs, the last save data you save is typically in the final stage. Your save data stays in that state after you leave the game. Thus, the end is parallel to the starting point in that it becomes the new point of rest, albeit a much more solemn, potentially even cynical one. It's a good example of how clever Toby can be with symbolism. But before we reflect more on the implications of all this, we have to address the sands in the room for a moment. There is a concept in Japanese called a yorishiro, which you can think of for simplicity's sake as like a holy item. An item that is said to represent more than its physical self. In Umineko, this concept is frequently paired with magic. Magic that proposes an object or person is more than what you see and may be another thing altogether. If this triggers the fedora within you as sounding like a stupid concept, it's hardly different than what we already do with art and language, assigning meaning to symbols. We live in a society where a number you see on your computer monitor, nothing more than colored lights, can entirely determine the course of your life. We easily imbue objects and symbols with intense meaning and consequence when everyone tells us we should. A yorishiro is a way of giving something magical more grounding, more persistence, or more determination, you could say. And it's a concept expressed explicitly in Deltarune. The mildly interesting speculation I mentioned earlier is about sands. Why does sands bleed is one of those questions that was generating speculation basically since Undertale came out.
Sans begins to bleed.
It might sound like high-level parasocial obsession-born brain rot overanalyzing to even ask such a thing, and evidently not caring as much about Undertale lore as such people, I initially dismissed it as such. But once I realized just how much Toby likes keeping his ideas consistent and symbolic, I kind of changed my mind. Here's a really interesting explanation that not only explains why Sans bleeds, but ties together a lot of pieces of his character. Think about when Flowey is struck down. Does he fade to dust like other monsters? No, because he has a literal flower to serve as his vessel. He's not simply the product of magic the way other monsters are. It's a particularly strong yorishiro because it straight up represents Chara's perspective on the outside world. So with Sans, we have awareness of timelines, awareness of game mechanics, ability to invade game mechanics to an extent, and of course, bleeding. The simplest answer would be that, like Flowey, Sans occupies a yorishiro, a literal vessel. He is not born from purely darkness itself, but rather uses a base. The most intuitive base, something that makes sense to exist underground, is bone. Sans bleeds to represent that his physical bone has broken. His unique abilities stem from having a more persistent form. How significant or even accurate this is must wait to be seen, assuming it's ever going to be revealed. So while we're on the topic of deeper theory culture, I figured I'd shout out the classic Chara theory. I've never thought too hard about this theory, but I do find the notion really cool, especially considering how Chara is the element of Undertale with the most narrative and thematic integrity. It's the proposition that Chara is narrating the entire game themselves. Any place where you see written narrative without an attributed to speaker, it's Chara's words. It adds an extra literary edge to every narration box by recontextualizing them as deliberate characterization. And honestly, the kind of nostalgic, uncannily innocent tone of voice to the narration kind of makes it a perfect fit for Chara. Chara is one of those so close yet so far ideas. The flaw with this idea is ultimately just the common sense one. Undertale's narrator is often omniscient. Unless Chara is a mind reader or an unreliable narrator, there are just simply too many unexplainable moments. The idea that Undertale is the product of magic in the Umineko sense gives us Narukara's missing final piece. Chara can be the narrator and be omniscient because they're participating in a magical world decided upon by human arbitration in the first place. It's like a more consistent way of playing pretend, sometimes with others being on page with you, not unlike a tabletop role-playing experience. Chara is either the witch that created this world, or is informed by whoever the witch the world owes existence to. You already have all the info about the world decided. You're just playing along. And Chara's objectification of the world really does seem to heavily suggest something along these lines. Now then, with all that said, it's time to take note of something very important. If Asriel is the bond with the game world, and Asriel starts the game as the cynical form of Flowey, then doesn't that mean that Undertale's world begins in a state where it has already been corrupted by the effects of power-hungry indulgence? Yes, it means exactly that. Undertale is a response to the existence of games up to that point and how Toby feels ugly relationships can develop with them and their players. Toby is playing on the fact that most players will be coming from at least some kind of loss of innocence with gaming. Let's look at the solution in Undertale, the true pacifist ending. As someone not in the Undertale fandom in the conventional sense, I'm not going to mince words. While I think many aspects of this ending are very well thought out and well done, especially how well thought out Chara, Frisk, and Asriel's concepts are, the execution in the immediate writing suffers quite a bit, especially in scenes featuring many characters at once. This is something Toby admitted himself to be a point of weakness, at least at the time. I've shown various people, most of whom played the game years back, clips of characters interacting in this ending, and in many cases the reaction was so negative that it inspired people to actually look up scenes themselves to make sure I didn't edit the dialogue myself to make it look bad. It's not just that the dialogue is cringy, it's that the characters feel kind of shallow, almost like parodies of themselves seen in the scenes where they held individual spotlights. So there's almost this weird dichotomy between true pacifist as the emotional parasocial climax and G-Root as the object of fascination and constant curiosity and a big draw to the game. Entering New Home during the G-Root is genuinely narratively impressive as a climax. The way it pulls all the contradictory elements of the childish Yusha heroic yet sociopathic ideal together at once. The locket, Chara's bond with Asriel, and the real knife, the most cynical weapon possible, still give me chills when I see the screen where they're picked up and equipped. This is likely what Toby meant by choosing love for the whole level of violence idea. The bond with Asriel is genuine love, but it's that very love that enables the power lust. Notice too how the locket and real knife are the same item as the heart locket and worn dagger in the physical sense, but change their attack and defense values dramatically based on perspective. This type of thing is a great emphasis of the human arbitrated nature of Undertale's world, born from magic. Now, I bring up this criticism of true pacifist for a reason. It deals with a limitation in Toby Fox's perspective. You, as the player, relinquish the spirit of Chara, sociopathic childish idealism, in favor of Frisk, the result of the peaceful bonds formed with the monsters. From what I understand, Frisk is significant insofar as you did not name them. They are their own person, born from you rejecting the spirit of Chara and allowing whatever person was there to be their own person. The breaking of the barrier allows the monsters to head to the surface, although this surface is clearly different from the brutal and violent surface where monsters are slaughtered instantly in the way we commonly see referred to in the underground, blatantly referring to our real world that we live in as the player. This new surface represents us freeing Undertale, the in-universe RPG, from the cycle of violence between Maou and Yusha that had plagued it up to this point. There's no longer a meaning to the separation between monsters and humans because we are no longer treating these monsters as fodder for our amassing of power. We've connected to them, the same way we ideally connect to anyone. And therein lies the limitations in Toby's perspective I'm referring to. Is that really it? Toby's solution to the Yusha dilemma was just learn empathy, learn to accept your flaws, put down the controller, and touch grass? There's a game very well known for the influence it had on Undertale's creation, thanks to Toby getting secondhand info on it alone. Moon Remix RPG. Moon is actually one of my favorite games. Moon lacks the conventionally strong narrative core that Undertale has with Chara and Asriel, but it makes up for it with some other really cool aspects. But again, a strength of Moon is definitely not its core narrative and resolution. It's a very heavy-handed, prescriptive, touch grass message with all the layers of a propaganda film. I have a hard time finding meaningful differences in much of Undertale's true pacifist resolution. Exploring fundamental natures is the heart of great thematic development and literature. It's digging into a subject so far that you pull out its inherent contradictions and complex, multifaceted relationship with what's around it. Moral messages are not deep. The fact of the matter is that morality, while important for living effectively, is nothing more than a tool humans utilize to achieve simple goals like self-preservation. Vomiting prescriptive morality in fiction is no deeper than a video of a gluttonous man scarfing down a buffet of food. Both might be appealing to certain types of viewers, but neither of those is literature. The entire concept of the Yusha in the first place, the reason Chara fell into the tragedy they did, is because of friction with the society they lived in. To have something ideal you can both bond with as a friend or even sibling, but then use as a way to indulge in fantasies of power. Power you want to use to get back at the society you feel wronged by, makes it very easy to take that Faustian deal. This is a great showcase of what so many young people who get sucked into the world of video games felt. It's a complex acknowledgement of many facets. The solution, however, is not. The childish Yusha ideal is discarded with nothing more said of the reasons it came to exist in the first place, nor exploration of the problems it was trying to solve, misguided as it may have been. Literary critique aside, something about this has bothered me since I experienced Undertale, or perhaps even prior to that, just by learning about Toby. It's as if this literary stopping point for thematic development comes from a personal preference and not digging deeper. Almost as if there's an aversion to something that comes with the act of doing so. These are the thoughts that went through my head after finishing Undertale in 2017 and thoroughly digesting it. There were so many questions about Toby as a person, as a creator, and as a not quite an otaku. However, coming late to the party, it wouldn't be long before getting some answers. Deltarune's first chapter dropped without warning in 2018, and with it, the solidification of my thoughts on Toby Fox. Dark, darker, yet darker. These are the words attributed to W.D. Gaster, and a key phrase for Deltarune. Let's waste no time in breaking apart what this probably means. But first, just a warning. We're now talking about a game with only 2 chapters out of 7 and possibly a secret 8th, knowing Toby. The speculated information is going to increase from here. I'm also not going to get into elaboration as much, just the minimal amount needed to make crucial points. It is simply impossible to prove anything without a concluded story, because even well-established details can get undone with a single retcon in later content. The important part is going to come from peeking into Toby's mind, not Deltarune's plot itself. So, Gaster's words here are actually somewhat easy to figure out, given the idea of what we just went over. Undertale is born out of the darkness of a cave system. Deltarune is born out of the darkness of the ocean. The ocean depths are darker than the caves. Darker than dark. Now, remember what we said is the first thing you create out of darkness when creating. This is the crucial piece every Deltarune theorist misses. Light. The deeper in darkness you are, the more freedom you have to create. When it's dark enough, you can create an entire world. In this case, the light world. So let's spell it out. The light world in Deltarune is darker than the dark world in Deltarune. We don't have to know who created it, but I'm confident we can assume this much. This provides an easy explanation for why stabbing the ground produces a dark fountain. It's a literal fourth wall break for the light world, allowing the darkness of the ocean in. When you think of volume of light from a basic objective standpoint, it's a simple gradient from light to dark. However, when you think of darkness as a canvas for creation, the gradient changes. Now the center is the darkest, forming a double-sided gradient with light on each end. In other words, dark worlds, ironically, are closer to reality than light worlds. The egg item was actually the first thing that made me get on the right track with understanding Deltarune's world. The description, not too important, not too unimportant, really stuck out to me. I trust that Toby wouldn't write a description like this without meaning it literally, as anything else would feel cheap in a way I don't expect out of him. I thought about this idea very literally. Why is the egg not particularly important, but still definitely matters? I still don't know what he meant by this, of course, but what I found upon thinking about all the events surrounding the egg is that there are a bunch of nonsensical jokes or references, almost all of them defying the logical bounds of reality. The most intuitive way to take this, then, is that the specifics don't matter, but the big picture matters. So what was the big picture? To me, it was to stress to not take the idea of the light world being a logical, real world seriously. Upon seeing things this way, it becomes increasingly difficult to unsee it. Once the shadow crystals got added to the game, I was positive. And now, once and for all, we can put an Occam's razor up to the shadow crystals. No convoluted explanations about truth or time or removing certain objects but keeping others. The shadow crystals are just crystals of shadow. They are darkness crystallized. Think about what happens when you peek through a red transparent object. Everything you see becomes red. It stands to reason shadow crystals work the same way. Everything you see through a shadow crystal, you see drenched in darkness. Peeking through a shadow crystal in a dark world shows us the light world, because the light world is the product of more darkness than the dark world. Peeking through a shadow crystal in the light world makes Kris disappear. Thus, Kris disappearing in this context, and their influence on the world disappearing, as we see through Susie, suggests that Kris is not actually native to the light world, at least in the form they're in upon us starting the game. Kris must be the product of, or rely on in some way, a layer brighter than the light world. What is something that is constantly being referenced as a provider of light from above and associated most strongly with Kris? The human soul. There are no end of references to the soul as shining. There are two things outside Deltarune we have to look at now, as both likely possess a solid deal of insight into Toby's intentions with all this. Both of these I already mentioned in some capacity earlier. The first is Moon Remix RPG. Light in Moon plays a very specific symbolic function. There are two sources of light in Moon that matter. The first is just the outside world when you open the door of your home and step out and touch grass. The second is the in-game moon, which is associated with the light from the television screen that displays the in-game game. The idea is that the moon is the irrational goal of the in-game game to represent how the player is obsessed with the television screen. It also presents the idea we see Deltarune present of only one ending. Spoiler warning, skip ahead a moment if you want to be surprised by Moon's ending. But in Moon, no matter what happens, the result is the same. The fate reached by the evil corrupt Yusha, sort of a prototype for Chara's concept, is also the same. All you can do is shut off the game and go outside and touch grass. It's just a question of if you use the journey to learn empathy or not. The ending is still the same. We actually see this concept of only one ending and choices don't matter first introduced by Toby in the Halloween hack. Toby actually spells it out for us. We really only have one choice, keep playing the game or not. It's very similar to the idea presented in Moon. The game has created a goal for us, and as long as we play the game, we will reach that end goal. Toby even introduces this idea that Varric is already dead and our player control is what brings him to the end. Furthermore, there's an important note about the town being a closed circle that is more or less peaceful, yet claustrophobic. Now, given how much Toby himself isn't exactly the proudest of this hack, I don't like to imagine Deltarune as just a more elaborate remake of it, but it's undeniable that all this sounds oddly familiar when it comes to Deltarune. When it comes to the whole Varric being dead factor, funnily enough, Toby actually plays on our expectations from Undertale, where we are confirmed that the game starts with Chara dead and maybe Frisk sharing the same body. In Deltarune, Kris starts with a bandage equipped, but it's heavily implied to be a band-aid, as if to say, Kris is not dead. However, there's no getting around that there's a lot to imply that without the red soul, heavily implied to be the manifestation of the player, Kris has a very hard time staying animated. There's also the fact that their side of the room is empty and neglected. Given the type of person and mother Toriel is, I can't see it as anything other than unnatural that she would allow the room to stay that way, especially considering Toby made a comment about how she loves you in the live commentary.
Your mother loves you.
There's also one other thing. The one thing on Kris's side of the room is the empty birdcage in a pole cart. It's extremely strange, and honestly I can't think of a single reason for it to be there other than showing us that items were being removed from the room. The only logical reason for this would be that Kris moved out and is now magically back somehow, or they passed away and are magically back somehow. Either way, there's a constant feeling that Kris does not naturally belong where they are, and that what the player provides, frequently symbolized with light, similarly to the way Moon associates light of the screen with playing the game, is crucial to Kris's continued existence. It makes sense to associate this light with determination, since it comes from a highly persistent source, the literal human playing the game. Recall from Undertale that determination allows for the cheating of death in-game, because determination corresponds to persistence beyond the bounds of the basic game. Even if you die in a video game, you can keep going in real life, imbuing your character with invulnerable persistence. There's also strange details, such as the way Toriel emphasizes the recognition of the knife as belonging to Kris. Typically, a highly protective mother would not acknowledge ownership of something as dangerous as a knife for their child and would confiscate it. Whatever is the case, the only way I can perceive the composition of Deltarune is that we're in a world born of absolute darkness, and Kris, enabled by light and determination, does not belong in that world. There's so many details that could be combed over here, but that's all better left to the actual theorists and additional chapters to explore than myself. Here's what appears to me to be the most crucial, thematically illuminating details, however. There is no Undertale to be had in the light world. There is no RPG quest, no Maou to be defeated, no virtues to claim. It's a solved world from a Yusha's perspective, with no game to play. Asriel's absence makes sense in this context, given our notion of him in Undertale as the bond with the game. It's really hard to say what Kris ultimately wants, but we know they don't want to be human, much like Chara. We also know that, at least under certain circumstances, they want to open dark fountains. We know they have a proactive interest in demon summoning. a term we've been conditioned to associate with Chara and the quest for RPG Yusha-type power. Senk's video on Deltarune proposes that Kris is proactively seeking power, and I am inclined to agree. And with Kris's aesthetic in the Dark World making nods to Varric from Brandish, Toby's symbol of raw RPG Yusha-type power, I can't see Kris as anything other than a symbol of the hunt for power. What is the key difference above all else between Dark Worlds and the Light World? The fact that combat can occur in the Dark World. It's a chance to inflict violence and gain power, something we have no means to in the Light World. If we're to believe T-theory, the notion that the character-themed Ts reveal the affection levels of one character toward another, Kris likes Susie quite a bit. An easy explanation for this is that Susie is a disruptor and willing to inflict violence, something that could potentially lead to power. We do type in a name at the beginning of the game, although unlike Undertale, we are explicitly naming ourselves with the notion of being the creator. Through this name, we are given the castle town in our own name and the ability to collect Darkners in it. There is a clear motif of ownership and control in Deltarune. A notion that frequently shows up is control of one's own self versus being determined by outside forces. The prophecy Ralsei tells us is a very bold example of being determined by outside forces. It's literally a prescription for how to live. The last step in the prophecy is the vague wording of banishing the angel's heaven. And given the angel's association with the player, something we already saw in Undertale, sounds a lot like the end of a game where the player is forced to stop playing because the game is finished. Interpreted this way, all games banish their angel's heaven when no longer giving the player a reason to keep playing. The Light World and Dark World seem to be opposites in this sense. The Light World provides no objective and no meaningful control, while the Dark World provides an objective and control. Now ask yourself, what brings a player to a game? Specifically a role-playing game. What is the most common reason someone would want to play a role in a game? To fulfill an objective and to experience a sense of control. If our control over Kris is some kind of demon possession that provides some kind of chance at power and control for them, it's the introduction of the Dark World that gives us any reason to come in the first place. However, unlike Undertale, the Dark World doesn't seem to stem from any fundamental Yusha ideals. It's very arbitrary and mostly consists of random anthropomorphization. In that sense, it's almost like it's a quest just for the sake of a quest. If Asriel is the bond with Undertale's journey, Ralsei is the bond with the Dark World journey. But that's exactly why Ralsei is so underdeveloped in his sense of self. He wasn't given anything more than he needs. His most pronounced starting trait is his unquestioning devotion to the existence of the player, as if the entire reason he exists is to call forth the player and carry them through a journey. So what does Kris ultimately want? Is Kris the spirit of Chara? Do they want to reach Asriel and reconnect, yet are cursed to live in a world where there is no means to create grounds for Asriel's presence? In many ways, Deltarune's Light World feels like Undertale's world after having moved on from it, but in an abstracted form. The game is intended for those who have played Undertale, after all. The plethora of references to nostalgia, childhood, and abandonment of things there used to be a bond with seems to suggest this is easily possible. There are a lot of parallels between Kris and Noelle, suggesting a potential foil relationship. Noelle seems to be searching for a sibling she can't reach and attracted to elements of control. Is Noelle going to fill the Maou villain role at some point, according to Kris's desires, so Kris can become the Yusha? Or perhaps Des will fill this role? There's a lot of possibilities here, but the core motifs and ideas are pretty well established. And honestly, all of that is interesting and all, but what is Deltarune, ultimately? I mean that in the most fundamental identity sense of a story. Its themes. The very fundamental ideas about life it explores. No matter how many times I find things in Deltarune and new suggestions about where it's headed, I just keep finding Undertale again, just scrambled around in different ways. Undertale gave us this very unique perspective on Toby's generation's relationship with the culture shock of Japanese games and the Yusha concept to accompany them. It was an exploration of nostalgia and escapism that, while very far from perfect, articulately addressed those inherently contradictory elements of childhood idealism. And so, what is the purpose of Deltarune? To do that again, but in slow motion? Sure, there are some shifts in what gets focus and arguably some new motifs and plot ideas, but I've yet to find a single suggested theme in Deltarune that I can't point to a place it was already developed in Undertale. When I look at the voice of this work, I can't help but see someone trapped in childhood, much like Kris is trapped in whatever cycle they are trapped in. Toby Fox had the kind of childhood that sounds eerily familiar to me, and I'm sure many millennials. It was a period where the internet era was just barely getting started, where we were being slowly drip-fed the culture-shocking creative products of otaku media and otaku-adjacent media, while having to figure out some way to reconcile these incomplete, imported scraps with our own abysmal yet undeniably formative culture as Westerners. Toby found his initial professional creative identity upon making some of the music for Andrew Hussey's webcomic, Homestuck. Homestuck is a rabbit hole unto itself, and honestly, a terrifying one I don't recommend looking into, lest you have whatever innocence still remains in you dunked in a bucket of spit. It was a multimedia type thing where each page can be anything from lots of text to drawings to animation to a tiny video game or any of those at once. I managed to avoid it altogether despite being on the internet during Homestuck's prime years in the early 10s. I only learned about it later via Toby's Undertale fame while the whole thing was in the process of collapsing like some kind of degenerate virtual Roman Empire. Hussey in his prime wasn't the worst writer. Actually pretty decent for non-Japanese standards, so the comic itself is admittedly mildly interesting before he was infamously strong-armed out of his sanctity as the proper author halfway through by subversive fans who allegedly wiggled into positions of influence. It's all very strange and creepy stuff. But arguably much more interesting than Homestuck itself is the cultural context surrounding it. Otaku media has fought a very hard battle in the West up until recently, where it is still fighting a battle, albeit one I would describe less superlatively difficult. Think about all the worst things your teachers and movies and whatever scared you with about the horrors of bigotry, then imagine the sum of all these negative things unanimously directed at otaku and otaku media by every demographic in existence all at once. There were only two types of people who openly, proudly displayed their love for more niche anime and otaku core media. Those brave enough, and those outcasted enough. Needless to say, this is a pretty small pool of people, so the majority of people who engaged with otaku media and anime did so in a half-committed way. If you don't know what to picture, imagine the members of Trash Taste Podcast, but somehow much worse. Homestuck and the culture around it was very much the embodiment of this kind of half-commitment to interest in otaku media. When it wasn't being Generation X nerd culture core or creative millennial quirky core, it was being a mix of mainstream battle manga jump-tard and old-school irony weeb. If none of these words make sense to you, you just need to know it was cringe, both the work itself and the fandom that embodied the spirit. It reflected a culture that, for all intents and purposes, engaging with otaku media in a sincere way was a forbidden act to. Deltarune was conceived right after the peak of Hussey's success and the peak relevance of Homestuck. Toby was deeply entrenched in the culture around Homestuck. Instead of moving forward after Undertale, Toby decided to return to this time in his life. It all comes together to form a picture of something deeply rooted in the basic concepts of otaku culture, yet oddly distant from the tools and wisdom that normally comes with that culture. It's as if the experiences with these strange and foreign pieces of media are inspiring and illuminating, but only insofar as they directly connect to the childhood we already know. There's this constant glorification of the society that we grew up in as Westerners, as Americans. If not in the sense of trust and admiration, then at least in the sense of preoccupation and interest. It's so much like Hussey before him, who built his entire aesthetic out of embracing anything quirky, unusual, or random, as long as it didn't reflect the style of otaku media in any significant way and kept its relationship with a distinctly childish and Western perspective on the world intact. Toby is at once clearly free from the shackles of loyalty to his Yusha ideal and otaku media, yet seemingly obsessed with running the basics of this topic into the ground. It's a pattern I can't help but see all the time in the Western world. Toby just happens to be the one with the proactive drive to do his best in exploring it. And yet it begs the question, why? Why are we dwelling on these topics otaku media has already long left behind and moved on to more sophisticated things? As someone who has been taking creative writing seriously for more than half my conscious life at this point, I understand how hard it can be to differentiate themes from one story to another. It'd be a lot to ask out of someone like Toby, who had limited experience with writing stories and was mostly running on talent and inherent bleed over from music. I also understand what it can be like to be enchanted by visions that come to you in dreams, only to be disenchanted with them after really trying to make them work in a story. Maybe Toby found himself in that exact type of situation and it hurt his motivation. Or maybe Toby's cooking some serious curveballs and is going to blow my mind. Toby said he didn't like the idea of having to be committed to Deltarune exactly the way it was with Chapter 1, but the fans didn't like that idea. Maybe Toby noticed limitations with Deltarune's plot and needed time to completely rework the plan. It's going to be impossible to say for now. But despite everything, it's still a fact that, at the moment, Toby is the most prominent indie game creator taking Japanese influence and insisting on a narrative-driven use of the media. In the current market, that is an extremely valuable thing. It's something we all have to fight for the continued existence of. And hopefully, he proves my lack of expectations wrong. Toby is the West. I am otaku. Although we may disagree for now, we have a common goal. I will be playing Deltarune 3 and 4 when they release, and report my thoughts and observations. I will be releasing the first full chapter of ORKASTLE, my own game, shortly after those Deltarune chapters drop. It's a game deeply steeped in my feelings toward the West and its relationship with otaku media. I'm going to continue to fight for otaku representation and respect in the Western world, long after ORKASTLE is complete. Toby will continue to be a relevant force, at least until Deltarune is complete, no matter the result he chooses for it. And maybe, one day, we'll come to see things a bit more eye to eye. So, that was effectively all my thoughts of the last 7.5 years summed up. I was originally planning on releasing this a few more days from now, but I figured I'd just get it out of the way because I want it out of my hair. I actually made it in pretty much record time for people who usually make these types of videos. However, next time, I want to just use a video editor because I really just want to be able to work on ORKASTLE without any distractions. You can see me stream work on it. I'll be finishing up the battle demo over the next couple days, and that's actually going to be playable for anyone who subs to me on Patreon. As always, infinite thanks to everyone who supports me on Patreon. There's like a million other rewards too, so legit the best Patreon in existence. See that right there? That's Kanyo and Rhea from ORKASTLE saying pretty please. If I get a lot of well thought out comments, I will do a stream where I respond to comments 3 days before Deltarune 3 and 4 release. So ORKASTLE is a game that is deeply connected to Undertale. You can kind of think of it as like an inverse, but different from the way Deltarune is. It's a response to Undertale the same way Undertale was a response to classic JRPGs. And I can promise you, ORKASTLE is going to be the next huge celebrated indie RPG. It will have all that same pioneering energy Undertale had. Toby's specialty was music, but mine is storytelling. And that's the reason why I was able to make all the observations I did in this video. From this point forward, Toby's fate and mine are intertwined. I'm going to be doing a Kickstarter campaign after the ORKASTLE story demo drops sometime in June. I'm kind of reaching the limits of what is comfortable without a budget, so all the help is going to be absolutely crucial. In current year, you kind of have to run a successful YouTube if you want to also be a successful game dev. It's just so much work, and I'd like to be able to branch out and hire composers and whatnot, so if you're coming in as a Toby fan, then welcome. You will absolutely want to keep an eye on what I'm doing. Both further thoughts on Toby and keeping an eye on ORKASTLE. If you're one of my regular viewers, stay based in Otaku.
I'ma start screaming.